moment, the protagonist emitted a powerful aura and said he didn't care if the guy believed him. The man leaned towards Liu and grabbed him by the collar of his t-shirt, lifting the guy in the air. Lin believed that the most important thing now was to make the guy pay for this. Liu didn't believe that the protagonist would dare to do something with him, because he was one of the richest heirs. But the guy was wrong and flew against the wall with great force. He was seriously injured and no longer had any doubts about the protagonist's position. Then started begging to forgive him, promising to pay any money. Lin looked at the guy and asked if he really looked like someone who needed money. Qing watched with a satisfied smile as his master made the guy feel the consequences of his actions. Liu's arm was broken and the rest of his body hurt, but the protagonist decided to stop and said that this was just a warning. Lin wanted the beaten guy to understand that next time he would not be forgiven. At that moment, the hero was about to leave and is always advised not to talk about his identity. After that, they were walking down the hotel corridor when Qing asked if Lin was afraid of something happening. The protagonist promised that if Liu's family tried something, they would all be ruthlessly annihilated. Suddenly, the girl's phone rang and she paused the conversation. Qing was very scared when Dr. Chen reported that the little princess had been kidnapped and her whereabouts were unknown. Lin was also unhinged by this news and they rushed to the hospital while protecting Xin from this news. They arrived at the infirmary in record time. Dr. Chen was there, and the god of war wanted to know when his daughter disappeared. Chen said that he brought her breakfast and went to prepare for physical therapy. But when he returned, Ray was no longer there. The protagonist hated himself for not being able to prevent the kidnapping of his daughter. Anger filled his body, and he destroyed the floor of the infirmary with one blow. Then Chen fell to his knees and admitted that it was all his fault, and that he should have taken better care of the little princess. But the protagonist said that he doesn't blame him for the kidnapping, because the doctor was busy fulfilling his duties. These words left Chen lost. Then Lin ordered Qing to immediately go to the checkpoint and find the kidnapper. At that moment, a guard was sitting in a small room and was involved in a game. He was sure that he had to win. Just at this moment, Qing appeared behind him. She distracted the game guard and reported the disappearance of the patient, asking to give her the camera footage, but the man demanded more detailed information about the missing person. Qing clarified that the patient is a child and she disappeared about an hour ago. The guard turned to Qing irritably and said that only an hour had passed and they needed to search the hospital first. The man continued to play on his mobile phone and informed him that he would only start the search when a day had passed. Suddenly, a beam of light took the phone out of the guard's hands, scaring the adult man. Lin had no intention of wasting his time, so he was going to do whatever it took. The security guard got angry and shouted that he could not provide records, and besides, the place was forbidden for outsiders to enter. The protagonist released his frightening aura and Qing realized that mugs would possibly roll, so she hurried to stop the master and decided to present a coupon stating that they were members of the imperial family. The guard was speechless when he saw the card that represented the imperial family and was a symbol of the supreme power. Qing strongly recommended that they hurry up and provide the recording. She saw that Lin began to calm down and the guard went to the computer quickly. He began to look for records of the last hour and finally found a moment when they could clearly see Ray sleeping in his room. The protagonist looked carefully at the recording and asked to enlarge the lower panel. The recording showed that a man in a white coat lifted the girl who was sleeping in bed and took her in a direction unknown. The guard looked at the silhouette of the kidnapper and realized that he looked somehow familiar to him. Lin heard this, and the man reported that this man looked like a hospital intern named Zhao Gang. Qing noticed that he had not seen this guy yet. The guard replied that Zhao is not very popular in the institution and entered here through contacts. He added that 2 days ago Zhao came to talk to him and asked about the hospital surveillance. This turn of events complicated the situation. Lin began to lose control of himself again. He gave Qing only 5 minutes to look for Zhao Gang. The girl did not discuss about the deadline and immediately disappeared from the office to comply with the order. The guard sensed the oppressive weather and began to worry that he had done something wrong. Lin's dark mood could be felt from a great distance, so the guard chose not to interfere. The protagonist sat in the chair, and the man tried to understand if the members of the imperial family are always terrified. Qing was soon able to complete the task, and within minutes Zhao was brought to the office. She threw him at Lin's feet and reported that her people found him sneaking through the hospital and immediately grabbed him. The inmate retorted saying that he is a doctor, that's why he was in the hospital. Lin demanded to know where the boy took the child. Zhao pretended that he didn't understand what kind of child they were talking about. The protagonist had no more patience and soon his foot began to press on the kidnapper's shoulder, so hard that the ground began to crack. Lin pressed until Zhao's right hand was completely pressed to the ground. Qing and the guard watched the interrogation. The man was very nervous about the cruelty with which Lin acted. However, the kidnapper could not stand the torture and said that he was hired. The god of war was happy to hear such a statement because now he could give himself a reason to stop trying to control himself. Lin got up from his seat and hit Xiao hard. Although at first glance the blow didn't seem strong, Xiao was badly hurt and spat out red liquid. The protagonist didn't allow the guy to catch his breath and stepped on his chest. Lin pressed the kidnapper to the ground with the help of his leg. Zhao tried to seize the moment and pretend he had lost consciousness. Qing immediately saw through him and asked Lin to let her make him talk, but the protagonist replied that he wasn't going to waste time on such things. The young doctor realized that he only had one chance to survive, so he promised to tell everything and immediately said where he had taken Ray. Zhao could barely speak but said that he put the girl in Sun's car and he took her to his house. Lin wasn't too surprised when he heard that name, but now he was sure that Sun would get his end. Zhao says that Sun forced him to go into the hospital and kidnap the girl. Then he asked for him to be released, but Lin believed that the guy had made a terrible mistake and not even exterminating him is enough. After that, the protagonist asked Qing to handle the kidnapper's body and then follow him to Sun's house. Meanwhile, Sun's property was quiet. Ray was tied to a chair and she yelled for her uncle to let her go. She added that she was sure that the police would arrest the man. However, Sun laughed, saying that without evidence, no one would dare to break into the home of an influential family. Sun was a disgusting person and blamed Zin for his actions. The man believed that he had to repay the girl for ruining her health. Sun pulled her cheeks and the girl said that her mother had never done anything wrong. Ray kept resisting because he was sure that his father would soon appear and save her. Sun hit the girl's forehead because she dared to mention Lin in front of him. He says that this garbage was the cause of his suffering. Ray began to cry loudly and suddenly heard a noise of glass breaking. The protagonist appeared behind Sun and immediately hit him in the face. The wall broke and he fell to the ground. The girl saw her father, and the tears immediately stopped flowing from her eyes. Ray was happy to see Lin, and he started to untie her from the chair, promising the girl that everything would be fine. The girl told her father that she was waiting for him, and the man began to carefully examine his daughter, looking for injuries. The girl told that the bad uncle managed to hit her in the forehead, but as soon as the father arrived, the pain went away. Lin picked up Ray and asked if she was ready to teach the bandit a lesson. The little girl replied that she was ready. Sun trembled when the girl told her father that she didn't remember which hand her uncle hit her with, but she said it was very painful. Sun decided to take advantage of the moment and try to run outside. He wondered how Lin found him so quickly. The God of War listened carefully to his princess's story and drew his own conclusions from it. Sun was already near the exit and believed that he would be saved as soon as he ran out into the street, because he believed that Lin wouldn't hit him in front of everyone. But the guy didn't take into account the fact that Lin was considered the God of War, and his speed surprised people's minds. That's why Sun's escape failed, and now he will have to accept the punishment. Lin looked at the kidnapper scared and said she didn't remember letting him out. Every second, Sun realized the gravity of his offense and was overcome by horror. He decided to try to fight back and aimed at the hand with which the protagonist held his daughter. Then Sun ran as fast as he could and asked for help, hoping that his parents would save him. Naturally, he could run a lot because Lin held the guy tightly by the hand. Then, with a skillful movement, he twisted Sun's arm, causing him to scream in pain. Ray covered his ears and complained to his father that that man was too noisy. The protagonist promised that now the bad uncle would be silent, and immediately a blue flame appeared in his left hand. This fire was directed at Sun, and he screamed loudly, causing the girl to close her eyes. Sun's eyes darkened, and instead of screams, almost inaudible squeaks escaped from his mouth, and he fell to the ground. At that moment, Lin heard the scream of the head of the family. The man broke into the room and begged to spare his son. The father looked in shock at his son's state and realized that everything was very bad. His chest was burned and his whole body was covered with bruises. His eyes were rolled. Then his father fell to his knees before the God of War and begged him to have mercy and forgive son's stupid mistake. But the protagonist was not affected by these words because he did not feel sorry for his daughter. The head of the family knew that they were at a disadvantage. The next moment, screams appeared in the room. Qing reported that everything was fine in the hospital. Ray was frightened by such a sudden appearance, but the father explained that this aunt was his friend and there was no need to be afraid of her. Then Lin handed Ray to Qing to finish off the evil uncles alone. Sun's father couldn't handle the fear. Ray held Qing's shoulders and wished his father to successfully take revenge on Sun. When Ray left the room, the protagonist could show all his power. Ellie remembered that he had shown kindness once before. The head of the family tried to take the blame on himself and hoped to convince Lin to save his life. The God of War reminded the man that he had no right to impose conditions. At this moment, Sun was trying to crawl backwards, but this time his pleas were useless and Lin finished off the guy with one blow. The father couldn't do anything and had to see his own son going base. It all ended when Lin said it was too late to beg for mercy and that he doesn't give anyone second chances. He took advantage of the speed and approached Sun's father, who was still in shock. The hero took the man's head and said that it was better for his family to get out of town inside one day because if they stay, they will be beheaded. The father understood that if he didn't want to go to the next world, he would have to agree with Lin and leave the city. After all these events, on Leah's property, his father broke into the room and was furious, wanting to find out who dared to hit his son. The father promised to tear the culprit to pieces. Lee wanted to complain to his father as always, but suddenly remembered that if he dared to reveal Lin's identity, the man would destroy him. So for the sake of the family's well-being, the guy had to shut up. He became apathetic and admitted that he didn't know what to say. The head of the family also got angry with his son and slapped him hard in the face, saying that Liu should remember that they own the city. Liu wondered if the Jian's family had more power and decided to keep Lin's identity a secret for now. The father considered his son weak but added that his story was unnecessary as he had already hired an investigator. Suddenly a man appeared next to them and reported that he had managed to discover the connection between the culprit and the Jian's family. The father was ready to destroy the entire Jian's family at once. He noticed that the investigator wasn't leaving and assumed he had some more news. He turned out to be right, and the man talked about Sun's murder and added that the killer was the same person who beat Liu. The horror ran through Liu's body, and he was seriously worried that it would be next. His father considered Sun's family a failure for not being able to deal with someone like the Jian's family. The man was completely consumed by the desire for revenge and figured out how to deal with the Jian's family on Benhai's celebration night. After some time, the night came, it arrived, and it was time for Xin to pick up her daughter from the hospital. The protagonist's wife entered the room and brought a cake asking how Ray was feeling. But to her horror, her daughter was not in the infirmary. The woman called her daughter in despair, but there was no answer and she was terrified at the idea that something had happened. The cake fell from her weakened hands. In the next second, Xin heard her daughter's voice. She forgot everything and ran to the girl asking about her well-being. Ray didn't want to worry her mother and lied that her father took her to play. Xin asked the girl not to play with strangers. The woman got nervous when her daughter said that Lin was taking her to play. This is because Xin believed that her husband was at home all this time. Qing watched with emotion as the cake was discovered and noticed that Lin's wife valued her daughter's life above her. Lin was nearby and admitted in an anguished voice that Xin was really a good mother. The protagonist was very distressed, saying that he owed her a lot. Then Lin reminded them that it was time for them to go, because this time they are going to the Benhai banquet, so you have to get ready. The protagonist, in his last battle, he was ready to fight until his last breath for the peace of his family. Meanwhile, a man was sitting in the pool and drinking wine calmly. He turned to his subordinate and asked if it was true that the great Lin had awakened. The server confirmed that such rumors circulated, and also information emerged that one of the families had already been expelled by him. The Lord of the Dragons believed that this was just a show to show his importance, but in fact his family had already lost its power. The subordinate was convinced that Lin was a threat to the emperor and suggested getting rid of him. The man got angry with the servant, and without leaving the pool directed his energy towards him. The guy was thrown back and the Dragon Lord said he didn't remember giving such an order. The servant fell down and insisted that it was dangerous for His Majesty to leave the God of War alive, but the Dragon Lord believed that Lin could be useful, since he had a good reputation among the people. However, he considered that Lin should be shown somewhere. The subordinate heard the Dragon Lord's words and promised to solve everything. Then the Dragon Lord walked to the center of the pool and extended the hand that did not look human to the spear, but the spear refused to obey and a red lightning began to appear along its entire length. The dragon god was forced to let go of the spear because it rejected him. The lightning bolt from the spear severely wounded the man in his hand. Suddenly he said that as Lin was still alive, so he needed to be visited. At that moment the eyes appeared in the man's unusual hand, and the concentrated power began to appear in his palm. The emperor decided that, since he could not use the artifact, he would simply destroy it. The lightning from God's own spear lit up all around, accompanied by the mad laughter of man. Meanwhile, in Lin's house, all the family members lived a normal life and spent the night calmly. Suddenly, Lin felt something strange and was surprised to realize that the Thunder God's spear had been destroyed. Qing noticed the sudden and drastic change in the protagonist's face and asked what happened. Lin asked about the spear. Qing replied after the border war heard that it was taken by the royal family, but the Lishan spear only recognizes its owner, so it would definitely not be used by third parties. The protagonist replied that the spear had been destroyed a few minutes ago. The girl says that the Lishan spear is a divine weapon, then he didn't understand how he could be easily destroyed. The protagonist replied that this was a warning to him. Besides, he knew who could destroy the spear and that person wouldn't miss Binhai's celebration. Then Lin sat in the wheelchair and promised the king that he would gather what was taken from him. At this moment, a man dressed all in black appeared near Lin's house, and he quickly approached the windows. He noticed Lin's room and aimed, throwing a blade towards the prota. The window next to Lin broke and something passed through her at great speed. Qing realized that a hitman had visited them. Lin managed to lower her head and picked up the blade, remaining unharmed. The subordinate shouted to the main character that she was immediately going after the assassin. Lin carefully examined the dragon god dagger in her hands. Jiang and the mother were sitting in the living room when they heard some strange noises and tried to find out where they came from. Suddenly the lights in the room went out and the girl looked around in fear. Lin was extremely scared when she realized that there was more than one killer in the house. Jiang screamed when she saw the silhouette of a guy in the darkness right in front of her. The girl tried to find out from the stranger who he was and how he entered the house. but the criminal remained silent. This man was wearing a mask and looked carefully at the girls, saying that they would pay with their lives for covering up for the wrong person. Then a small purple ball began to form in the criminal's hand and he prepared to attack the girls. Lee didn't want to go from the base for no apparent reason and offered to give the man all the money they had. The boy in the mask invited the woman to take her money to the grave. Jiang hugged his mother, who was also trembling with fear. Several agonizing seconds passed until the girls noticed a man holding the criminal's hand. Lin condemned the guy's actions and slightly twisted his arm. The protagonist didn't understand why he attacked defenseless girls. Lin was going to protect the Jian's family even if she didn't like them very much. Then a blue lightning appeared in her hand. The criminal still had a free hand and concentrated his power in his fist. The men attacked each other at the same time and each managed to strike the other's blow. The mercenary laughed and prepared to attack again. The man had fun thinking that Lin was weak. They continued fighting and soon a knife appeared in the boy's hand with the mask. Suddenly the door of the house was about to open and the bandit asked Lin if that was his family. At that moment the man reacted instantly, and when Xin and his daughter entered the house there was no one else there. Xin entered and saw the girls terrified. Jiang asked if her sister had returned. Xin was surprised that they were sitting in the dark and went to the switch to turn on the light. When the room was lit, she saw the terrible consequences of the battle and asked horrified what had happened. While the mother was recovering, Jiang said that they were attacked by a guy but someone managed to save them. Jiang added that the savior looked like that Mr. Lin who showed up on Axin's birthday. Ray started running into the house and shouting that his father saved the family. Grandmother was disgusted to see this because she considered the protagonist to be trash. Meanwhile, the hero dealt with the criminal and now returned to look at the golden dagger. Qing appeared at the window and regrettably reported that she had failed the task, and the bandit managed to escape. Lin said that this is not important now and asked her to look at the dagger in her hands. Then the subordinate recognized the dagger that the Dragon Lord awarded his servants. In addition, she added that Binhai's celebration was moved to tomorrow night, which confirmed her hunches. Lin asked Qing to go to Wang and say that he must fetch Xin to ensure his safety. The protagonist understood that they were planning to try something against him at Binhai's celebration, after which Qing said goodbye and left. At that moment the bedroom door opened with a roar and the happy daughter ran to the hero. She was sure that it was her father who saved her aunt and grandmother, so her father praised her for her intelligence. Lin took the girl in her arms and asked how she would react if her father wasn't exactly a hero. Ray smiled at his father and admitted that as long as he protects her and her mother, then he will always be a hero. At that moment, Xin entered the room and then asked his daughter not to bother her father. She took Ray in her arms and agreed that they would let her father rest a little longer. Xin really wanted Lin to wake up. Suddenly she heard the cell phone ringing and answered. Lin's wife heard Wang's voice and asked what happened. The man replied that the celebration was brought forward and someone would pick her up tomorrow. But Xin replies that she no longer had an invitation. However, Wang assured that the invitation is just a piece of cardboard and she is a respected guest. The girl replied that she was happy with the news and also apologized for the inconvenience. Then Xin stroked Ray's head and asked her to take care of Daddy tomorrow night. The daughter was happy to stay with her father and admitted that she was not afraid of anything by his side. After a day, the night of Binhai's celebration finally came. The huge territory was lavishly decorated. Li didn't understand why Xin looked so upset at this important event. In fact, Xin was worried about her family, especially after her house was attacked. But the mother rudely replied that her two scum was good for nothing, and now she must concentrate and find a man to marry. Suddenly they turned their heads and Xin saw grandfather with Yan. Jiang held his mother and admitted that she was outraged by her cousin's behavior. Yan also noticed her relatives and asked how they got here without an invitation. Jiang shouted that they were honored guests of Lord Wang and he had personally brought them to the celebration. The guy next to Yuan was surprised by Jiang's beauty, while Yan tried to put herself in a better light. The girl was amused, saying that she had the invitation and started to tell Jiang to go home. Lin's sister-in-law pointed to Yan and reminded her that this invitation belonged to her sister, so she has to return it. But Yan replied that only a worthy representative gets an invitation. The guy next door finally noticed the invitation and almost choked when he saw that it was purple and gold. These colors were the symbol of the imperial family, and this invitation confirmed the rumors that the Jian's family was close to the Wang family. Suddenly another man appeared next to Yan and took the invitation, saying it was fake. The girl tried to take it back but failed. The man noticed that her joy didn't last long. Yan was annoyed because a stranger was calling the genuine invitation fake. The old man ordered the girl to watch his tongue and introduced the respected gentleman named Zhou. Yan immediately felt anxious when she realized that an influential person was now next to her. While a member of his family was trying to figure out why there was scum like the Jian family at such a lavish celebration, after these words the anxiety evaporated and the irritation and anger returned to their place. But the grandfather stopped Yan. The old man bowed and apologized for his rudeness, and also said that the family was on hand. The man smiled when he heard these words from the head of the Jian's family. Then Joe rejected the invitation and blamed the Jian's family members for beating Liu. He shouted that he wanted to feel sorry, but now he was considering taking action regarding the situation with Liu. Yan didn't understand what he was talking about, and explained that they didn't do anything to Liu. The girl quickly looked at Xin, and thought she had something to do with it. At that moment, Yan took Ixin's hand and started accusing her of harming Liu for trying to win her over. Xin replied that it couldn't have been her because he didn't even know about the beating. Liu's father didn't believe the girl and ordered her not to pretend and tell everything. Otherwise, the Jian's family will be forced to immediately leave the city tomorrow. The fight was interrupted by the appearance of Wang. Behind him was the protagonist with his daughter and king. Wang would not tolerate those who started family quarrels in this place. Ray saw her mother and called her. The girl held her father's hand and waved happily to her mother, saying that her father asked for a surprise for mom. Joe looked at the new people with disdain and asked who they were. Liu's father replied that the disabled person in the wheelchair is Ixin's husband named Lin Feng, and the girl is their daughter. Joe started laughing until he cried, saying that he didn't understand the meaning of "this loser is here." The man's laughter was interrupted by Lin. The protagonist asked what he could still do. Sin looked at her husband and couldn't believe that he was really awake. Ray was next to his mother, and now she could show her evidence that she was telling the truth. Joe believed that waking Lin up was useless, since he was in the wheelchair. The protagonist just snorted at this statement and stood up, releasing his sinister aura. Joe was very surprised by what he saw and didn't last long to say that he was going to break Lin's legs for what he did to Liu.